Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." That's from the book of Isaiah, chapter 6, verse 8. I don't normally start my talks with verses from the Bible. I was raised a Catholic and haven't been a regular Mass attendee in many, many years, but I'm a storyteller and a poet. And ultimately, for me, the Bible is full of great stories. And one of the verses that I'm especially struck by these days is Isaiah's willingness to stand up and say, "Here am I." As a good Catholic, I don't know the Bible all that well because we didn't really use that in Mass. But I know that a part of me is genetically in my DNA tied to the church through my fascination and my love of ritual, my thirst for justice, my love of story, and my love of questions. So as someone who doesn't know the Bible all that well, I'm curious about what prepared Isaiah to step forward with such conviction and to say, "Here am I, send me." And I think Isaiah's willingness and his conviction has a lot to teach us today in these times when there are so many things that we can rise up to, whether it's climate change, or war, or poverty, or violence. So I imagine Isaiah, in his spiritual calisthenics, perhaps answering or asking himself the following questions. What is mine to do? How do I want to show up? What is the story I'm telling myself? And what is my medicine? How do I want to show up? 18 years old, Cambridge, Massachusetts. I am from Deming, New Mexico, the first person in my high school ever to be accepted into Harvard. I've never been to the campus. I've never spent a night in Boston. I've never spoken with anyone who's attended the school. I'm terrified, and yet I desperately want to show up as someone who seems like she deserves to be there. My uncle, who lives in Washington, D.C., and is married to a flight attendant so he can fly for free, flies from Washington, D.C. to Boston, picks me up at a friend's apartment. That friend is getting ready to attend University of Massachusetts at Boston. We drive around and around and around and around Harvard Square and finally find a parking. I take out my suitcase. I enter through the gates that feel like they're guarded by lions. And my suitcase feels heavier than anything I've ever packed in my life because not only am I carrying JCPenney long johns and a dictionary that's very bulky because this is before the internet, but I'm also carrying the hopes and expectations of my entire community. When I got accepted to Harvard, my mom said two things. One was, if you want to go, we will find a way to get you there. And the other one is, your going there isn't just important for you, it is important for all of us. So as I walk through those gates, I see red brick and ivy. The walls really are ivy colored. And I see people in limousines, and I see butlers, and I see Jaguars and Mercedes. And I think to myself two things. I'm really glad my parents aren't here because I don't know if they'd fit in. And then I think something else. All this time I've thought my family was middle class, but now I know we're poor. And from behind me, I hear Hernando whisper to my Uncle David, "God, I am glad I don't have to go here." What was the story I was telling myself? The first one was, I don't really belong here, and everyone is smarter than I am. I was certain that everyone had gotten some book over the summer that said how to be at Harvard, and somehow they had skipped over me or made some kind of mistake. The second story I was telling myself was, if I screw up, I screw this up for everyone. They will never let another brown girl from a poor family from New Mexico into this school again. So my first year at Harvard was a silent year. If you can imagine, because now I talk a lot, but if you can imagine, I sat in class quietly, afraid to make a mistake, afraid to draw too much attention to myself. In high school, I had been involved in theater, in band, in the choir, and so I thought, oh, I'll try out for these things. I wasn't called back for a single thing. I wasn't finding my way, and It's really cold there. And not only is it really cold, it's like gray all the time. And for a girl from like sunny southern New Mexico, it was the sky just felt low all the time. I felt very much out of my element. Fortunately, over time, over the course of the 4 years, and it took all 4 years, I found my community. I found a group of friends who accepted me for who I am, who asked me hard questions and accepted my answers, who approached me with curiosity and most of all compassion. And their curiosity and compassion enabled me to approach myself with curiosity and compassion. I learned in those 4 years not only how to be a student, how to integrate my curriculum, how to study things that I was interested in, not just things that I thought that I had to do, but I also learned that my inability to succeed at Harvard immediately was not a failure on my part. It wasn't reflective of my intelligence or my abilities, but more it was a measure of my preparation. I was going to school with people whose parents had gone to Harvard, whose grandparents had gone there, who had gone to prep schools and really amazing public schools. And here I was, a graduate of Deming High School, my one stoplight, one high school town. Though I didn't have the pedigree and I didn't have the papers and the things that I felt like I needed to be there, I know now, and I knew when I graduated, that I was accepted for me. I might not have had the credentials that I felt like I needed, but I had my story. I had my parents, I had my grandpa's work ethic, I had my mother's work ethic and her discipline. I had my father's sense of humor. I had my grandma's attitude of not taking from anyone. And what I learned there is that for the first 18 years of my life, my medicine, rather my drug, had been success. I had not learned how to fail when the stakes were low in a safe environment. Everything that I wanted in school, I got. I got good grades. I was in the band, and I did well in the band. I was in the honor society. I was a drum major. I have pictures of the hat. And I was student body president, and so I just expected that to carry on. And when it didn't happen for me, I felt like I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't learn to fail, and I didn't know how to ask for help. So it took those 4 years in that school to learn how to do that. And by the time I graduated, I learned that my pocho Spanish, my simple house, my high school education, my growing up on the border, the lines on my grandpa's hands, his stories of going to World War II and being a mechanic, and growing up on a dirt road, all of those things were not things that I had to overcome. They were the very source of my strength. They were the very source of my healing. And so now I know that my medicine is my very own culture, my very own family, my very own story. And when I don't know where to turn and I need my medicine, I know that all I have to do is go home. Whether it's the home inside me or the physical place that is the US-Mexico border in Deming, New Mexico, or a phone call with my mother, or just a candle that reminds me that I am the granddaughter of Florentino and Chinomoran. What's your medicine? My medicine is not only my family, my medicine is poetry. I'm 46 years, well, I'm 47, yeah. I'm meant to be 48. I was like, oh, 46, that was so nice, it goes by so fast. When I was 46 years old, I applied to become the Poet Laureate of Albuquerque. When I acquired that position, I was determined to create links between people and poetry, because let's admit it, a lot of people are scared of poetry in the way that they're scared of math. Poetry is not scary. And I wanted to create relationship and connection between people and nature. So my Poet Laureate project is a series of walks through the Rio Grande Bosque. In Albuquerque, we have the world's longest cottonwood forest. Every month, I invite a poet from Albuquerque to host a walk through the bosque to choose the work of a poet she or he loves, and then along that walk, we stop, we listen to poetry, we look for porcupines in the cottonwoods, we listen to the river, and we sit down on a tree stump and we write. So what does poetry ask of us, and why do we need it in this time? Why is poetry medicine? Poetry requires that we slow down, that we pay attention, that we spend time. In writing poetry, I am asked to consider not just the words that I'm using, but how they look on the page, how they sound together, where I'm going to break a line, and what is the relationship between the words on the page and the white space. Poetry is hard. Don't get me wrong, poetry is not hard the way that roofing and demming in August is hard. That's a different kind of hard. I will take poetry over that kind of work every day, and I'm thankful for the privilege that I have to be able to engage with poetry. But I will also submit to you that poetry is not only medicine for the writer, it is medicine for the reader. We should read a poem 3 times. Once to start to build a relationship, the second time to come to a deeper understanding, and the third time to really understand how that poem speaks to us. Not to dissect its meaning, not to strap it to a chair and force a confession out of it, but actually to just sit in relationship with the wonder and the mystery that a poem can give us. What's your medicine? In addition to poetry and culture, my medicine is also stillness. My best days are when I can wake up before anybody else in the house, including the pets, and I can go straight to my writing, or I can go straight to my meditation. When I am meditating, when I am still, I am feeding my core, my capital S self. And I know that that capital S self, just like it is for each and every one of you, is whole, is resilient, is undamaged, and resourceful. When I don't get that solitude, when I don't get that stillness, then what I'm doing instead is I am living out of one of my parts. And so I like to think of this internal community inside of me as my Jedi Council. So there's one part of me, and I know my core, my capital S self is whole and resilient, but I've also got like an Anakin Skywalker in there who's probably not the best person to be in charge. I've also got a Yoda who is super wise, and I've got a few folks who really want to be on the Jedi Council and didn't quite make it. So I've got Martha, who's my harsh inner critic, and I've got this perfectionist inside of me. And when I am parts driven, as opposed to living out of my capital S self, I know I am telling myself a story that doesn't suit me. I know that I am treating my parts of me with judgment rather than with curiosity. So that brings me to my next bit of medicine, and that is wonder. If I can just make an adjustment with a part of myself that I am having a hard time being in relationship with, if I can just turn to wonder rather than judgment, then I know I can start to have the building blocks of relationship. So let's say I'm feeling bad, I'm really hearing that inner critic. Judgment sounds like this: why are you acting like that? Which no one ever answers in a positive way. No one ever says, now that you've asked me that way, I really feel like I can open up and be vulnerable. That doesn't happen. All right, so wonder sounds like, I wonder what my reaction is telling me. I wonder what this part of me needs. I wonder how I might sit in relationship with this part of me. Turning to wonder creates an opening. If I can simply be in relationship with myself, even if that relationship is me standing across a room from a part of myself, then I know that curiosity begets more curiosity, and I can open up to that part of myself even more. I know that light begets light, and if I can do that and be in relationship with these parts of myself that I might not like looking at, if I can just do that with myself, I can do that with others. If I can treat myself with grace and with curiosity when I don't like what's showing up for me, then I can extend that to others. I can extend that to my husband, even when he's having a bad day. I can extend that to my stepchildren, and have had many opportunities to practice through the challenging teenage years. And I can extend it to my colleagues, and I can extend it to the characters in the nonfiction that I write. So not only do I write poetry, I also write prose. If I can simply do that, and if we can do that for each other, then we can break through and see a full spectrum of ideas and actually have our ideas challenged and our hearts open to one another, which I believe is one of the things that we absolutely need to heal ourselves and our communities. This is the basis of the work that I do. So I kind of work in concentric circles. I run a limited liability company, which is just a tax status, so you don't have to remember that. But it's called Artesana Creative Consulting. So artesana in Spanish means artisan, but it is based on the two words arte and sana, which comes from the Spanish word sanar, which means to heal. Art heals. So in these, I work in concentric circles. In the tightest, centermost circle is my writing and my poetry. It's my medicine. It's the stories I need to tell. It's my responsibility, actually, to write the stories of my family and to help to give those back to our community so that we can see ourselves on the page. The next circle out is my coaching practice. So in my coaching, I work with people who want to be more creative. I work one-on-one with folks who are working on novels and poetry collections and books. I also work with people who simply want to live more in alignment with their needs and values. And finally, and maybe the most fun thing that I get to do is that outermost circle. I do facilitation and I work in multidisciplinary artist teams, helping people to tell their stories and using those stories as the basis for community development and organizational development. I have worked with sexual assault survivors in Oaxaca, Mexico. I've worked with refugees in Fort Morgan, Colorado, and I've worked with the city of Albuquerque to help establish an Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. I believe in story. I believe we have our own medicine inside of us. I believe art heals. Here am I, send me. So I want to leave you with these questions. What is yours to do? Who is calling? And how will you answer? Thank you.